This episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, folks. This is Gordon, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And this is episode number 293 of the podcast. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're here and hope you'll take time to follow us and subscribe wherever you might be listening to your podcast. So looking forward to you hearing from my guest today, Carolyn Solo. And Carolyn is a therapist up in the Philadelphia area. And Carolyn is, she's also a doctoral student and doing a lot of really cool stuff, particularly in the niche of moms that have recently given birth and just postpartum depression, postpartum trauma, all of those kinds of things. And what we're going to be talking about today is how she is using EMDR intensives in her practice and having a lot of success with it. So I think it's going to be an interesting topic for you. You know, one of the things I'm always looking for is for ways for us to do what we do in private practice in maybe a little unconventional ways. You know, our typical way of seeing clients is, you know, that one-to-one model of sitting down with someone and talking with them for an hour. But Carolyn just talks about how she's finding much more success by doing intensives, you know, going for a much longer period and doing intensive therapy over a short period of time. The other advantage of doing it that way is that it's probably a more productive use of your time, and that you're putting a lot into a small space of time that frees you up to do some other things in your life and in your practice. And I'm always a big proponent of using our time in the most effective way possible. So anyway, I think you're going to learn a lot from Carolyn in this particular episode. But real quickly, before we get to my conversation with Carolyn, I'd love for you, those folks, or for those of you that are out there that are maybe in those beginning stages of private practice, to find out about the Practice Launch Club. The Practice Launch Club is something that I started a couple of years ago, and it is a membership community for those folks, like I mentioned, that are just in those beginning stages of private practice. Maybe you're making the transition from working for an agency. Maybe you're doing some work on the side in private practice, which is a good way to get into private practice, but you're really trying to figure out all the stuff. And one of the best ways to do that is in the context of community and getting some mentorship and help and support and accountability from others. So that's what the Practice Launch Club is about. We meet 2 times a month for an hour by Zoom, and it's a mastermind format with those meetings where sometimes we do hot seats, which just means that one of the members of the group presents a particular issue they're working on, and we help them brainstorm and problem solve around that particular issue. And also with the Practice Launch Club, you've got access to a library of little mini courses, as I call them, where I put together and go through some of the basics of running a private practice, particularly the business side of running a private practice. And we have a whole library of those courses that's available to you, plus resources like paperwork packets. All of those things are included in your membership. So I'd invite you to go over and check it out, and you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/launch club. And when you go there, from now until the end of September 2023, if you'll use the promo code just simply PLC Fall 2023, you can get $20 off your monthly membership by joining between now and the end of September 2023. So again, check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/launch club to find out more about it. And when you join, be sure to use that promo code PLC Fall 2023 to get $20 off your monthly membership. So anyway, looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Carolyn. But before we get to that, I'd love for you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft Network and also our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes.
Hi, I'm Whitney Owens. If you don't know me, I am the person behind the Wise Practice podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. I am so proud to be a part of this network, along with my good friend, Gordon Brewer, who's doing such amazing work on helping people on their practice journey. If you haven't discovered the Wise Practice podcast yet, you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'd love for you to join us as we explore how to grow a faith-based practice that brings you the income you need and the lifestyle you want. Be sure to check out the podcast and other helpful information at whitneyowens.com. There you will learn more about the Wise Practice community, how to become a member, as well as information on the 2023 Wise Practice Summit. And hey, Psychcraft Network is a sponsor, so hope you can make it.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like Therapy Notes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. Therapy Notes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, and be sure to use the promo code Gordon to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm really happy for you to get to know Carolyn Solo. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. And so Carolyn is outside of Philadelphia and in practice there. And really kind of your niche is helping people with EMDR intensives and that sort of thing. But as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Sure. Well, I am an EMDR therapist and consultant. And like you said, Gordon, I am outside of Philadelphia. I specialize in working with all sorts of complex trauma, but also with the perinatal and maternal mental health population and dissociative identity disorder, actually. And the primary format I use for my therapy is what's called EMDR intensives, which is, if you haven't heard of it, sort of a longer version of your average 50-minute therapy session, sometimes up to, 3 or 4 days over the course of a couple of weeks, with the aim to really move through stuff really quickly and efficiently. And I also do some business coaching to help other therapists get going with intensives. So that's something else I've started doing recently. I have a podcast about intensives that I just started called the Future Template Parent Podcast. If you know EMDR, Future Template will make sense to you. And the parent part is that I'm a mom of 3 girls. And I think a lot about how parenting impacts the way that we show up in the therapy room. especially given that I work with a lot of parents. And also that I feel like the intensive model gives parents a lot of freedom in their scheduling. So it's sort of that combined kind of niche. I'm also a doctoral student at Bryn Mawr School of Social Work, and I'm hopefully graduating next year. So
awesome. You got a lot going on.
I do, probably too much, but
yeah. Yeah. Well, good. That's good. Well, I'm really excited to talk with you about this topic. So let's just start with, if folks that might not be familiar with the concept of doing intensives, what do they need to know?
So most of your audience probably knows that EMDR is a trauma therapy modality. And, our standard model in our field for a while has been the 50-minute therapy hour, right? But EMDR is a very intense experience where you're really going deep into a specific traumatic episode. And often in a 50-minute session, you have that open up. How are you? How was your week? Blah, blah, blah. And then you have the close down. You might only get in about 20, 30 minutes of that processing time. So I don't know how long ago this was, but people started talking about intensives. What if we did EMDR for longer? And it really lends itself to like a longer time, just the way it's structured. And so essentially what I do now with my clients, my model is usually a 90-minute intake and then 3 to 4 days of 4 to 5 hours each over about 2 weeks. Wow. And the idea for me, I usually like to have clients come in with a kind of specific goal, like postpartum depression, or if they had a traumatic birth, maybe their baby ended up in the NICU, or repeated pregnancy loss is something I worked with, medical trauma, a specific medical event that was very traumatic. So it's sort of boundaried because that really lends itself well to working through something in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. I always like to tell new clients that I think of intensives as the Disney Fast Pass of therapy. You're sort of jumping the line. Because I really think that every hour of an intensive is almost like 2 hours of weekly therapy because you don't have that open up and close down thing. And I would say the other thing I really like about it is my schedule flexibility. That's huge. Obviously I said I'm a parent of 3 young kids under 7, and I need flexibility. Like if my kid gets sick, I can't work. And it's much easier to reschedule one day of one person than 8 people. And it's financially, I find, more lucrative. So I can take a week off and feel fine about it, and I'm not leaving people hanging because I don't have that many weekly clients anymore. I have a lot of people who just come for an intensive and then I send them back to their therapist.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So you're doing intensive just exclusively, huh?
Not exclusively. I still have some weekly clients from my, but I would say that 60% of my practice now is intensives.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And they're very popular. People are finding out about them.
Yeah.
It's getting around.
Yeah. And I think, that the concept of, even though it might be a little bit of a myth, but kind of the concept of a quick fix is appealing to people.
It is. And yeah, it is a bit of a myth. And I never promise anything, of course.
Right. Right.
But what I do say is I guarantee you we'll move through a lot more stuff more quickly than you would over 6 months of regular therapy. And some people are like, this is an issue that I need to work on now. I don't have 9 months. Right. It's also great for people that are really busy. Like I'll come in for 3 days and then I'm not going to have to carve out like an hour for therapy every week, So I feel like it's appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there's great research behind it too.
Yeah. So maybe walk us through a little bit of the structure of how you do sessions and that sort of thing.
Sure. So like I said, I have this 90-minute intake, and that's after I've done like a quick consult call to make sure they know what an intensive is, because sometimes people get my name and don't realize that I'm only taking intensive clients, So first I, consult call, make sure they get that. And then we have a 90-minute intake where I get, basic history. What do you want to work on? Do you have questions about EMDR? And then part of what I do during the 90-minute intake or consult is I talk them through this workbook that I have that basically gives me a really good history so that we don't have to do it in the session. And it really primes them to be like, oh, this is what we're working on. So I have some like attachment interviews in there. I have some like parts work kind of, I don't call it that, but like I ask them some questions about that. I ask them some questions about positive memories that they have so that we can call on those if we need to. So I really condense the time that we would spend in like weekly sessions talking through all that stuff. And I have them fill it out. I get it a day before. That helps me start the treatment plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually most people I recommend 3 days to start. And it's 2 hours, hour-long lunch break, 2 hours. And usually the first 2 hours are some prep work. Let's really get the treatment plan organized. Let's really figure out what we're working on. And then, EMDR is all about certain target memories that you're focusing on.
Mm-hmm.
So we also use that time to pick what our targets are going to be for the intensive. Come back from lunch. That's really what I do.
Yeah. So is this following a particular EMDR model that you've run across before, or is this something you've kind of come up with yourself?
Oh, no, I cannot take credit for coming up with it on my own.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because Francine Shapiro, who invented EMDR, when she designed it, or her intention was for 90-minute sessions always. That's kind of how she conceptualized it. But of course, insurance, reimbursement, and all that, and people's just expectations of what therapy is, kind of forced it into the shorter time. And so people, I don't know who first started doing this, but Ricky Greenwald, maybe. Anyway, I started hearing about it 3 or 4 years ago. I did trainings with some people who are kind of the original, there's one organization called Scaling Up that trains on this. And then Zero Disturbance is another organization. And I trained with both of them. And then I just was like, I think I'm ready to do this. And so it was intimidating at first, for sure, because it's so different than how we think about therapy. Yeah. And I think people worry, is it going to be really tiring? Am I going to feel so drained? There's a lot of fears, I think, that come up around it. But now that I've been doing it for a while, I feel really grounded in it as the way that I really enjoy practicing. You see so much progress in a short time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the kind of the marketing of this and then what you charge and all of that sort of thing. How did you come up with all those different things?
I mean, I certainly pulled on these trainings I went to. They helped a lot. And then I don't know if you're familiar with Kelly McKenna. If you follow Instagram at all, she does this Instagram Reels membership where she teaches therapists how to make reels.
Okay.
As marketing. And she built her entire caseload doing this. And now she teaches people how to do it. So I took that on as part of my marketing, and that's really gone well. I feel like it's very educational. People are learning about intensives, but also because with an intensive, you can come, some people can come from somewhere else, come for the weekend and leave. So it's not quite the limitations in terms of location. So people have found out about that. I certainly network with a lot of local therapists and say hey, this is a great adjunct to what you're offering. I have a whole page on my website. And this is part of what the coaching package I offer does is teach people how to do all this. And then pricing, I price the hours. So my hourly rate for regular therapy is $200 an hour. And I price intensives at $250 because I don't schedule anybody else that day. There is prep work involved. And I think it's kind of value for money, and people don't push back on it once I kind of give the rationale. I know that's a lot, but it feels like it reflects the value to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I remember several years ago, I was talking with someone on the podcast just about intensives for couples. And that, I think the appeal is that a person has this extended, devoted time to working on the particular issue.
Totally.
And I think they're probably more engaged by doing it that way as well.
100%. And I think the financial investment underlines that, right? They're there to work. They're paying a lot of money. They're taking a lot of time. They want to do this.
Yeah.
You don't get people who are like, oh, I don't know. I don't really know what to talk about. That's not who this is for.
Right.
And so, yes, people come and they're ready to work and they want the experience. They want to just focus. And so, and EMDR works nicely in that way because it's so focused on specific issues. So yeah, it works well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So if somebody wanted to start doing intensives, what are the starting places and what do they need to think about?
Well, I think first you want to think about your schedule. What do you want your schedule to look like? Because it is different than a weekly client load, right? So thinking about how are you going to kind of transition your schedule, right? You could even think about just offering extended sessions to start to current clients and see how they respond to that. I think thinking about marketing for sure. Like I definitely would think about talking to your network, reaching out to other EMDR therapists, reaching out to other kinds of therapists, and sort of saying this is a service. I even connect. My dentist sends people to me because there's a lot of people that have dental anxiety.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And it actually benefits him because it's easier to work with these people if they've worked through some of this, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about who the referral sources are I also network a lot with like doulas and birth centers and midwives because I do a lot of that work, and selling it to these people as like, it benefits them,
Mm-hmm.
or it benefits the other practitioner, right?
Mm-hmm.
They come to you, work through this stuff. It's much easier for them to go back to whoever else they're working with.
Right.
Kind of gotten over this stuck point,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's clinical skills you need to develop as well too.
Okay. Yeah. I was just wondering if somebody were trained in EMDR, making the transition to doing intensives, what else would they need to know?
I mean, I think, everyone says this, but it's true. It's like mindset work, certainly. I think recognizing you can do this, it's not impossible. Recognizing that a lot of the skills you already have, you'll just continue to use.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are some other clinical tools that I use pretty regularly that, we'll have meetings to people in the EMDR world, but like certain kinds of protocols that I think are really helpful. Having a lot of comfort with dealing with sort of like early life trauma is very important. I think knowing how to handle dissociation is very important. Having some this isn't essential, but I find it very helpful. Having some familiarity with parts work or ego states work or IFS, whatever you call it, because that comes up a lot. Really being comfortable with being flexible and kind of feeling like you can think on your feet, be creative. I think there's the standard protocol for EMDR that everyone learns in their basic training. You really want to have that internalized, I think, because once you've done that, you can become creative, you can become flexible, like any therapy modality.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I think those are some important things. I find the workbook super helpful, frankly. Like I think it primes the client and it primes you and it gives you a lot of information. It's not essential, but I have found it really, really helpful. And that's an idea I got from the zero disturbance training I did. She gave us a workbook as part of the training, but I've like adapted it to make it my own.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I find that people really like it and really respond well to it. Getting comfortable with just saying how much something costs out loud.
Yes.
Part of the mindset work,
Yeah. Yeah.
These are all things I talk about in the podcast, like all these issues, all this stuff.
Right. Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So in thinking about just your work with dissociative disorder, what are some things that you've learned that might be helpful to other therapists just around that particular clinical issue?
Well, for one, it's so much more common than you think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, dissociative identity disorder in its true like DSM-5 form is one end of a spectrum, but dissociation exists along a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
First of all of us dissociate, right? That's just a normal human coping strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's likely that if you deal with trauma, and honestly, who in our practices is not dealing with trauma to some degree, right?
Yeah, right.
You probably have people who dissociate in certain ways, you know? And so becoming aware of what that looks like, knowing the kinds of questions to ask in a really compassionate way, get a sense of like, what's the depth of what's going on here? Like, what's the impact this dissociation is having on this person's life? What's their awareness of it? And then really, I mean, there's some really good trainings out there about how to work with dissociation in a really competent way. And I think those are quite important because it's a very complex symptom presentation. Certainly, especially when you get to like the DID end of the spectrum. Like I've worked with people that have had like, ritual religious trauma for many, many years and have, 12 not co-conscious personalities. So that is a lot to
right.
And you can't just do that being like, oh, I'm going to try some CBT on this person. Like that's not what they need. Not that that wouldn't be helpful to some degree, but that's not going to get them moving towards some, I don't really like to use the word integration because that has a stigma in DID, but like some sense of more coherence. You have to be doing parts work, ego states work in a competent way. So,
right.
And I think one of the ways I like to do that in intensive, we don't do the same level of trauma processing because they might not be stable enough, right? But you can do intensive parts work sessions where you're speaking with 4 or 5 different parts or aspects of their personality in a 4-hour day. That's huge. Take you 2 months.
Right. Yeah. So, and I would guess too, just getting down to what are their desired outcomes with all of that.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes they don't even realize what's going on, right? So there's a psychoeducation piece and mindfulness and being more connected to their bodies. You know, a lot of people who are very dissociative don't feel pain. And that can be hard for us to imagine, but it's the truth. And so some of the early things you have to work on is like, how do you connect to what you're feeling in your body? You know, like that's a real piece of the work. Right. And a lot of that can be done beautifully in an intensive format. Maybe you're not doing traditional EMDR trauma processing, but you can do beautiful intensive work. You know, it could take a lot longer if you split it up.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like fascinating work, and I can tell that it's just something you're really passionate about.
I am. Because I feel like there aren't enough people who train in it because it feels intimidating. Yeah. Some of my most cherished clients have been clients with DID. The relationships I've formed with these people and the change I have seen, you know, brings tears to my eyes even thinking about it now. You know, so I want to tell people, don't be afraid. Don't be scared of working with those people. Right. They need people who know what they're doing. And there's great trainings out there. There's consultation out there. You can do it. I mean, but it's, So
that's great.
I am very passionate about it.
Yeah. Well, tell folks how they can get in touch with you and learn more about the trainings that you're doing.
Sure. So I do have this coaching package that I call my VIP day, which is get your intensive up and running in one day. And I teach you everything I know. And I like to say you can do it in your pajamas because, you know, virtually you don't even have to change. And I like you to write your web copy. We talk about who your referral sources are, what are all the clinical tools. I give you access to all the stuff I use. It's part of the package. So that's one way. I also have this podcast that I'm only on episode 10, but I'm really excited about it. And I have all these episodes mapped out in my head. People have been liking it. So it's called the Future Template Parent Podcast. And, you know, you can find it on every place that you would find podcasts. And I have an Instagram, which is more associated with my private practice now, but I also talk about the other stuff. And it's kind of a mouthful. It's Integritas, and I'll write that down for you so you can _wellness_recovery. It's my practice name. And Integritas is the Latin word for integrity or wholeness. I used to be a Latin teacher in my past life.
That's awesome.
And in DID, we talk about integration. So it felt kind of like a fitting name.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Carolyn, I got to be respectful of your time, and I'm so glad we connected.
Me too.
We'll have links in the show notes and the show summary for everybody to connect with you easily and that sort of thing. So any parting thoughts before we kind of close things down here?
Just that I think intensives are kind of the way of the future to some degree. I think people really want them, and the word is getting out. And you can do an intensive with whatever modality you use. I mean, think about Freud and psychoanalysis, right? That's basically what it's doing. So I think if it's something you feel like you have the capacity for and the bandwidth for, it's totally worth exploring. And also don't be afraid of dissociation.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, Carolyn, I hope we can have another conversation here soon. And
I would love that.
Well, again, a big thanks to Carolyn for joining me on the podcast. And I hope you have maybe gotten some ideas and some inspiration from Carolyn in what she's doing with EMDR intensives, and gives you a little bit to think about in ways that you can kind of expand your services or do this exclusively. It's pretty exciting stuff in my mind. So, but anyway, be sure and check out Carolyn's things. You'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary, and also check out her podcast. And the title of her podcast is Future Template Parenting. And again, you can find a link to that here in the show notes and the show summary. Check it out. I think I'm looking forward to listening to it. I haven't had a chance to listen to any of those episodes yet as I'm recording this, but I'm sure by the time this comes out, I will have listened. But anyway, take care, folks. I hope you'll take time to follow us and subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. And also, as a reminder, be sure and check out the Practice Launch Club. If you're in those beginning stages of starting a practice, that's exactly what this community is about. And again, you can find out more by going to practiceoftherapy.com/launch club. And also, big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice, and I'm always impressed with all the new things they're adding, and their support is second to none. But if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, and be sure and use the promo code just Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. And again, big thanks to them for being a supporter of the podcast. Well, take care, folks. Got lots of great guests lined up ahead. We're approaching episode number 300, and I've got a very special guest for that episode. So more to come on that. Take care, folks. Have a great rest of your week or weekend. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.